Hey there! Tonight's story might not soothe you right away, but it will pull you in. This isn't a tale of gods on their thrones or heroes in shining armor. It's about the things that made them tremble, the beasts, the curses, the nightmares that haunted the edges of ancient Greece and sometimes wandered straight through the middle of it. If this kind of storytelling helps you relax, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly helps you drift off. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing who else is wandering through mythology at this hour. So, dim the lights, pull the blankets closer, and let us begin with the most terrifying monsters in Greek mythology. Settle in now. Let the day dissolve into dusk. The flickering shadows on your walls are just that, shadows, and that low rumble in the distance. Merely the wind, not the stirring of something ancient, certainly not the writhing tail of a creature vast enough to block out the stars. But if you were an ancient Greek, oh, you'd be less certain, because in their world, beneath the orderly surface of Olympus and polished marble columns, there was always something seething, something beneath, something monstrous. And at the very bottom of that bestiary, lounging like a volcano on its day off, was Typhon. Typhon, or Typhoeus, if you prefer his more dramatic stage name, was no minor menace. He was the apocalypse with scales, the end of everything wrapped in a storm cloud. The Greeks had an unusual habit of imagining their gods and monsters as part of a large, complicated family, one where every holiday gathering would require a sacrificial goat and several emergency escape routes. Typhon, appropriately enough, was born late into the cosmic family drama. His mother was Gaia, the earth itself, who, by the time of his birth, had already grown rather irritated with how Zeus and the Olympians had overthrown her children, the Titans. Gaia was a great mother, yes, but also a terrible mother-in-law. In her fury, she mated with Tartarus, the endless chasm beneath the world. Not exactly a romantic partner, but then love stories in Greek mythology do often begin in a pit. The result of this liaison was Typhon, a creature so vast, so unspeakably terrifying, that even the Olympians reportedly fled at the sight of him. Now, to describe Typhon properly, one must abandon the usual measurements of biology. The poet Hesiod, a reliable source, if ever there was one, for intergenerational trauma in divine households, tells us that Typhon was so tall that his head brushed the stars. His arms stretched east and west, and his eyes glowed with fire. From the waist down, things got particularly festive, a mass of writhing, venomous serpents in place of legs, hissing and snapping like a particularly hostile maple. But wait, there's more. Each of his many mouths spoke in different voices, sometimes human, sometimes bull, sometimes lion, and at times the cacophony of it all would erupt into the sound of thunder, the roar of a volcano, or the shriek of a gale-force wind. In short, he was the entire weather forecast in one very bad mood. Now Zeus, ever the confident patriarch, had already dealt with the Titans. He'd cast Cronus and his kind into Tartarus and established a shiny new world order atop Mount Olympus, complete with thunderbolts, cloud palaces, and ambrosia brunches. Then Typhon rose. One can imagine the Olympians halfway through a celebratory feast looking up to see a sky-darkening silhouette approaching and realizing that perhaps they'd celebrated a bit prematurely. In most accounts, all the Olympians save Zeus fled in terror, transforming themselves into animals and galloping off into Egypt, where their disguises would later spark local myths. This, dear listener, is why you'll sometimes find Greek gods suspiciously resembling Egyptian ones. A kind of divine witness protection program, really. Zeus, to his credit, did not flee, at least not immediately. He met Typhon in battle. Lightning clashed against storm, the skies tore open, mountains shook. Poets, one imagines, reached for their scrolls. But here's the twist. Typhon won the first round. Yes, the king of the gods himself was overwhelmed. Typhon tore the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, quite literally de-limbing the ruler of Olympus, and imprisoned him in a cave. There, Zeus was guarded by the she-dragon Delphine, who no doubt thought this arrangement perfectly fair. It was only with the help of Hermes and Pan, yes, Pan, the musical goatman who apparently moonlighted as a rescue operative, that Zeus was freed. And once he had his tendons back, thank you Hermes, he regrouped. The final confrontation occurred on Mount Etna in Sicily, where Zeus unleashed the full fury of his thunderbolts. Typhon fell at last, buried beneath the mountain, where his writhing fury still causes eruptions and earthquakes to this day. So if you ever visit Sicily and the ground trembles underfoot, don't worry, it's just Typhon rolling over in his sleep. All this fire and fury wasn't just a bit of mythological spectacle. The Greeks weren't merely spinning tales to keep children from misbehaving at bedtime, though one imagines it was extremely effective. Typhon served a deeper purpose. He represented chaos, raw, unrelenting natural chaos. The Greeks were intimately familiar with earthquakes, volcanoes, storms, and all the unsettling little reminders that nature doesn't particularly care about dinner plans. Where modern minds might think of tectonic plates or volcanic pressure, the ancients imagined Typhon. It was a kind of poetry and, quite frankly, more fun to envision than sedimentary subduction zones. And Typhon was not alone. He was, as mentioned, the father of monsters. With Echidna, half serpent, half something else entirely, he spawned a gallery of horrors. Let's take a brief inventory, shall we? Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the underworld. The Chimera, a fire-breathing fusion of lion, goat, and serpent. The Hydra, with its regrowing heads and poisonous breath. The Sphinx, whose riddles caused more than existential dread. The Nemean lion, whose golden hide couldn't be pierced by mortal weapons. And many others who we'll meet again as our story unfolds. In a way, Typhon and Echidna are a lesser couple and more a factory, churning out monstrosities to populate the dangerous edges of the Greek imagination. But how did the ancients depict Typhon? Greek vase painters, never shy about ornamenting their wine jugs with a bit of divine trauma, occasionally gave Typhon a serpentine lower half and dragon wings. Others made him more human-shaped, though still terrifying. His form wasn't fixed, and that's important. Typhon wasn't just a character, he was an idea. He was the fear of the unknown given just enough shape to haunt your dreams. In the Roman period, Typhon was sometimes merged with other storm deities. The Alexandrian poet Nonnus, writing in the 5th century CE, gave us one of the most dramatic retellings of the Typhon battle, a cosmic symphony of chaos and fury. Not exactly a lullaby, but splendid for dramatic readings. Interestingly, the Egyptians, never ones to miss a good mythic crossover, absorbed some of these ideas into their own cosmologies. The Greeks in Egypt, particularly in Alexandria, sometimes equated Typhon with the god Set, another chaotic desert dweller with a penchant for causing trouble. Cultural diffusion, ancient style. And what became of Typhon? Though technically dead, or rather buried, Typhon never truly left the stage. The volcanoes of southern Italy, particularly Mount Etna, were thought to house his furious breath. When lava poured from the mountain's flanks, it was Typhon's wrath escaping in molten form. In literature and later mythology, Typhon became shorthand for unstoppable destruction, a cosmic final boss, a being whose defeat marked the establishment of order, the victory of Zeus, not just as a powerful god but as the upholder of structure over chaos. One might say, if a little sleepily, that Typhon is the reason the world doesn't fall apart every Tuesday. And yet he's still there, sleeping, breathing, rolling over occasionally, just to remind us that the earth beneath our feet is never truly still. So, dear listener, if you're lying there now in the hush of your room and you feel the soft hum of the world beneath you, remember the ancients heard it too. They gave it a name. They gave it serpents for legs and fire for breath. They made it mighty. They made it monstrous. And then they tucked it safely beneath a mountain where it could do no harm unless the mountain sneezed. We've only just begun our descent into the monstrous. There are more jaws to count, more riddles to solve, and more serpents than any garden would like. But for now, close your eyes. Let the tale of Typhon roll away like a receding storm. Let your thoughts settle like ash on a quiet volcano. The fire has dimmed. The monster sleeps, and so should you. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise of the day soften like a harp string, falling silent in the dark. You're not in your room anymore. No, tonight you're drifting downward deep into the quiet belly of the earth. Deeper still, into a place not quite mortal and not quite divine, a place where monsters are born. And waiting there, half in shadow, half in shimmer, is Echidna, the so-called mother of monsters. She's not famous, not like Medusa or Cerberus. No statues stand in her honor, no temples call her name. But without her, many of the nightmares in Greek mythology would never have drawn breath. She is old, older than Olympus, older than your pillow. Her story is scattered through scrolls and half-forgotten epics like bones buried in mythic soil. But tonight we gather those bones. Tonight we meet the mother. The Greeks, as you may remember, were rather fond of explaining the inexplicable with elaborate family trees. Earthquakes, that's Typhon tossing in his sleep. Madness, a gift from the Furies. A lion with skin too tough to pierce, well, that's just one of Echidna's babies. She's described, when she's described at all, as half-beautiful woman, half-coiled serpent. The upper half is alluring, almost divine, and the lower half is a serpent's tail that gleams with oily scales, forever winding, forever listening. There's a certain poetic logic in it, the top to entice, the bottom to consume. Echidna was not just a mother in the physical sense, she was mythological fertility itself, the force that brought monstrous forms into being. She didn't simply give birth to one creature or two, but to a whole ecosystem of terror. She was paired with Typhon. And what a pair they made! Between the two of them, they birthed virtually every beast that ever gave a Greek hero heartburn. You already know some of their offspring. Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guarded the gates of the underworld like a bouncer at the most exclusive club no one wants to enter. The Hydra, who added heads faster than you could chop them off. The Chimera, a fire-breathing hybrid, so confused it probably needed a map just to walk. The Sphinx, the Nemean lion, Orthrus, the Caucasian eagle that pecked at Prometheus's liver day after day, all hers, quite the maternity ward, really. But who was Echidna, and why did the Greeks imagine such a being? The answer, as always, lies in fear and fertility. In the ancient world, the wilderness was not a place for leisure hikes and panoramic selfies. It was dangerous, unknown, and crawling with things that hissed. Forests had bandits, mountains had storms, caves had gods or monsters or the gods of monsters. And beneath it all, there was a powerful belief that nature, wild nature, gave birth to the things that frightened you. Echidna was the personification of that belief. She was the wild womb, the fertile chaos that lay just beyond the edges of the city-state. Not evil exactly, but untamed. She wasn't meant to be worshipped so much as respected, like the growl in the underbrush or the gleam in a predator's eye. Her name, Echidna, has uncertain roots. It's possibly related to the word for viper. Or perhaps it comes from even older languages predating the Greeks entirely. She may be older than even the stories we use to explain her. It would suit her, being older than memory. Many primordial goddesses are like that, fading into the edges of the mythos while still holding everything together. Echidna doesn't take center stage in many myths. She's rarely the villain. She's never the hero. She's simply there, breeding, waiting, lurking. And in that quiet, generative presence, she becomes one of the most powerful figures in the mythic world, precisely because she doesn't demand attention. She simply continues. In Hesiod's Theogony, one of the earliest and most influential Greek texts, Echidna is described as a nymph who lives in a cave, devouring all men who pass. Now, that could be metaphorical, or perhaps she simply liked her snacks fresh. Either way, she was clearly not someone to meet on a stroll. According to Hesiod, she was immortal and ageless, which is rather unfair for a mother of so many. But then Greek immortality never did come with stretch marks. She lived in a hidden cave, far from the gods and men, tucked away near Arima, a place whose location even the Greeks weren't too sure about. Some said it was in Cilicia in southern Anatolia, others pointed to deep beneath the earth. Some quietly just avoided the subject. And yet, despite her shadowy role, her presence is felt in nearly every heroic tale. Think of the great monster slayers of myth: Heracles, Bellerophon, Perseus, Odysseus. Nearly all of them faced one of Echidna's offspring. Each heroic deed, each monster conquered, was an echo of her legacy. She is the challenge behind the story, the breath behind the beast. There's something maternal in that too. You see, in ancient Greek society, women were often confined to the home, invisible in the public record, but absolutely central to the survival of the family and the continuity of culture. Echidna mirrors this role, silent in the myths but essential to their progression, the mother whose children define the trials of men. Some later authors gave her a bit more narrative flesh. In the Roman tradition, she sometimes partners not with Typhon but with Tartarus himself, a being or a place, depending on how poetic you're feeling. Some even claimed she gave birth to a line of mortal monsters, kings and queens who ruled in far-off barbaric lands. In this version, her blood seeped into the earth and bore empires, which in its own way might be the most frightening legacy of all. In art, Echidna appears only rarely. The Greeks, bless them, preferred to depict her children, flashier, more dramatic, and easier to fit onto pottery, but when she does appear, she's unmistakable. A woman from the waist up, beautiful and often bare, with the lower body of a serpent coiling into the gloom. Her face is calm, unapologetic. She is not a monster writhing in agony. She is not begging to be understood. She is simply Echidna. And what a strange power that is. To be monstrous without remorse. To be feared but not villainous. To give birth to terrors and never ask forgiveness for it. In modern times, her name has survived in biology. The echidna, a spiny anteater from Australia, bears little resemblance to her mythological namesake, aside from being wonderfully peculiar and producing the sort of confusion that would make a Greek storyteller proud. It lays eggs. It has four-headed reproductive anatomy. It is shy, ancient, and seems entirely unaware of how absurd it looks. One suspects Echidna would be flattered, but back to her myth. Echidna's story fades gradually after the early sources. As Greek thought shifted from oral epic to philosophy, monsters like her were explained away. Natural causes, allegory. The torchlight of logic was being turned toward the dark corners of myth, and many of those shadows scattered, but not all. In the Renaissance and even in modern fantasy literature, the trope of the mother of monsters lives on. You'll find her echoes in Tolkien's Ungoliant, in Lovecraft's Shub-Niggurath, in video games and novels, and in the minds of anyone who's ever wondered, but where did the first monster come from? It always comes back to Echidna, because even now, when the world is mapped and measured and most of the dragons have been replaced by tax forms, we still feel that tug at the edges, that sense that something wild, something ancient still breeds beneath the surface. The Greeks gave that feeling a name. They gave it a shape. They gave it a mother. And so as you lie there tonight, drifting just on the edge of sleep, know that you are not alone. The cave still waits, the coiled tail still stirs, and the mother of monsters still dreams beneath the earth, birthing horrors in her sleep. She does not roar, she does not chase, she simply exists, and that perhaps is the most terrifying thing of all. Now, close your eyes. The world is quiet, the monsters are fed, and the mother is resting. So should you. Breathe in, let the weight of the day fall away like sand through your fingers. You're not here. Not really. Not in your room, not in your bed. No, you're walking through a darkening meadow under a silver moon. A cool mist curling around your ankles. Ahead, a black river winds across the land like a ribbon of ink. and just beyond it, a gate, massive, unmoving, ancient. And beside it, the soft growl of something that does not sleep. You have come to the edge of the world, or at least the edge of the world as the Greeks imagined it. This is the entrance to the underworld, and the creature standing guard has 3 heads, each hungering for the soul of a trespasser. Meet Cerberus, the Hound of Hades. Now let's set aside modern expectations. Cerberus is not evil, he is not a villain, he doesn't chase heroes through city streets or bark in nightmarish alleyways. No, he is far more dignified than that. He has a job, a role, a purpose. He is the guardian, the doorman, the final obstacle, and he's very, very good at it. Cerberus, sometimes spelled Kerberos if you're in the mood for older spellings, was the child of Echidna and Typhon, a sibling to the Chimera, the Hydra, and other such charming playmates. But Cerberus was special. He wasn't designed to terrorize mortals or rampage through the countryside. He was created to keep the dead in and the living out. His appearance varies depending on which ancient source you're reading or which pot you're peering into, but the basics are consistent. Cerberus has 3 heads, though some ancient authors claim as many as 50 or even 100. He has a mane of snakes, eyes like lanterns, and sometimes, depending on the poet's mood, a serpent for a tail. He's like a canine jigsaw puzzle made from nightmares, stitched together with divine purpose. But let's focus on the 3 heads. Why 3? Well, scholars and sleepy philosophers have debated this for centuries. Some say the 3 heads represent the past, present, and future, which would be terribly poetic for a dog. Others suggest they symbolize birth, youth, and old age, or body, soul, and spirit. Or perhaps the ancient Greeks simply thought 3 heads were more terrifying than 1 and left it at that. Now imagine it. A creature with triple the teeth, triple the growls, triple the stare, and yet not malicious, not unkind, simply resolute. You see, the Greeks didn't fear death the way we sometimes do, not as an ending, but as a passage. What they feared more than death was imbalance, disturbance, the wrong soul in the wrong place. Cerberus ensured order. No soul escaped the underworld. No living foot stepped too far. He was, in essence, the boundary. You may be wondering, what was it like, this underworld? It was not fire and brimstone, no pitchforks, no eternal torment, at least not for most. The underworld was quiet, dim, and shadowed, a place of memory more than suffering. It had regions, of course. The blessed went to the Elysian fields, green and gold with eternal ease. The punished were sent to Tartarus, where monsters and titans writhed, and the rest simply wandered, shades among shades. Cerberus guarded them all, but as with all good monsters, he did occasionally face opposition. After all, Greek heroes were a meddlesome bunch, always leaping gates and barging into places they had no business being. Take Orpheus the musician. He played his lyre so beautifully that even stones were said to weep. When his wife Eurydice died, Orpheus descended into the underworld to fetch her back. He didn't fight Cerberus, he played for him. And the hound, overcome by the mournful melody, lay down his heads and wept, or perhaps simply dozed. Either way, Orpheus passed. Then there was Heracles, or Hercules as the Romans later called him, who was tasked with bringing Cerberus to the surface as one of his 12 labours. Not defeating him, mind you, just removing him temporarily from his post. Heracles, strong and stubborn as ever, wrestled the beast with nothing but his arms, no weapons, no tricks. He subdued Cerberus and dragged him into daylight, where the hound, unaccustomed to such brightness, blinked and howled in dismay. But Heracles was no villain. Once his labour was complete, he returned Cerberus unharmed to his post. Even heroes, it seems, understood the importance of boundaries. And then there's Psyche, a mortal woman, who through a series of divine misadventures involving jealous goddesses and impossible tasks, found herself journeying through the underworld as well. To pass Cerberus, she brought honey cakes, Sweet bribes for a beast who, despite his job, still enjoyed a treat or two. Some say she tossed them, one by one, each to a separate mouth. A very polite offering, really. These stories tell us something about Cerberus. He is not defeated by force, not truly. He is overcome by gentleness, by cleverness, by compassion. A lullaby, a cake, a fair challenge. He is a creature of rules, not rage. And that perhaps is why he was so respected. Even Hades, god of the underworld, had a sort of fondness for him. In many depictions, Cerberus is shown sitting at his feet, like a loyal companion, not chained, not whipped, just present, watching, waiting. And here we must take a brief, sleepy detour into etymology. The name Cerberus may stem from an Indo-European word meaning spotted, which means, if we're being terribly literal, Hades may have named his monstrous three-headed hellhound Spot. That's right, Spot, a joke perhaps from the ancient linguists, or maybe just a reminder that even the most terrifying beings can have ordinary names. There's also a connection between Cerberus and ancient burial customs. You see, the Greeks often placed coins with the dead, payment for Charon, the ferryman who guided souls across the river Styx. But in some traditions, honey cakes were buried as well, offerings not for Charon but for Cerberus, a bribe to ease the soul's passage, a gift to the guardian, something sweet for the sentinel. It's easy to forget, amid the snarling imagery, that Cerberus was not cruel. He didn't torment souls, he didn't hunt them. He simply ensured they stayed where they belonged. In a world where chaos was always licking at the edges of order, Cerberus was a gate that held firm. In Roman times, the image of Cerberus endured. Poets like Virgil described him in the Aeneid, where the hero Aeneas must also pass the hound to reach the realm of the dead. Again, the method is familiar. Soporific treats, sleep, not struggle. And in later Christian adaptations, Cerberus became associated with demons or Satan's watchdog. But that's a different lens, painted in darker strokes. The Greeks saw no sin in his existence, only necessity. Artists over the centuries couldn't resist him. On urns, on mosaics, on medieval manuscripts, he appears all snarls and scales and flicking tongues, often with only two heads, sometimes with three, occasionally with dozens, always with a presence that says, "Here is the edge, do not cross it lightly." And yet, of course, the best stories are about those who do. Still, once their business is done, the great heroes rarely harm him. They return him, leave him be. Cerberus is not the villain to vanquish, but the challenge to honor. There's something comforting in that, isn't there? A monstrous dog who does not chase but guards, who snarls not from malice but duty, who lets you pass if you are clever or kind or brave enough to earn the right. And as you lie there, perhaps with a dog curled at your feet or snoring down the hall, you might smile at the thought that in the ancient world, even the threshold between life and death had a guardian who wagged his tail for music and drooled for honey. Cerberus was terrifying, yes, but only to those who tried to cheat the rules. He never hunted the innocent, never strayed from his post. He stayed eternal and watchful at the gate, a beast of legend, a child of chaos, and still somehow just a very good boy. So rest now. The night is calm, the gate is closed. The guardian is at his post, his three heads laid gently on stone, watching the road behind you, keeping the silence intact. No need to run, no need to fear. You are not trespassing tonight. You are only drifting. Sleep well and let Cerberus keep the watch. Let your body settle. Let the weight of your limbs fall into the mattress, like stones sinking gently into a clear pool. The night presses in softly, like a curtain, drawn with care. And beneath that hush, somewhere distant, somewhere ancient, is the quiet ripple of a marsh, a breathless wetland choked with mist. Something stirs beneath the surface, something with too many eyes, Tonight we drift toward the swamps of Lerna. There, in the stagnant, steaming waters, lived a creature so persistent, so impossibly difficult to kill, that it took a demigod with a club, a sword, and a bit of divine backup just to slow it down. This is the tale of the Lernaean Hydra, a creature of heads and venom, born of chaos and left to thrive in the shadows. You've probably heard of the Hydra, even if only vaguely. In popular imagination, she's become a symbol of problems that grow worse the more you try to fix them. Cut off one head and two more rise, a rather discouraging metaphor for anyone with a to-do list. But the Hydra wasn't just a metaphor. To the ancient Greeks, she was very real and very much in the way. Her origins, as with so many monsters in Greek mythology, trace back to Echidna and Typhon, the mother and father of monsters. They didn't so much raise their children as release them, scattering their spawn across the map like little living challenges for the heroic youth of the age. The Hydra was one of their more impressive creations. She lived in the swamp of Lerna, not far from the city of Argos, and was said to be a massive, coiling, many-headed serpent. The number of heads varies depending on the poet. Some said 7, others claimed 9. A few, feeling especially dramatic, went as high as 100. But no matter the count, they shared one troubling feature. They didn't stay dead. When one head was severed, 2 more would sprout in its place, like an enthusiastic weed that took pruning as a personal challenge. And if that weren't enough, her blood was said to be so venomous that even its scent could kill. Her breath was toxic, her bite fatal, and the very ground she walked, or rather slithered upon, was poisoned. She didn't even need to chase her prey. They simply wandered too close, and nature did the rest. Now Lerna itself was already a place of mystery. In Greek thought it was one of the gateways to the underworld, a liminal space where the veil between worlds was especially thin. The swamp, always still, always steaming, was feared for its depths and secrets. It was said that no one who entered came out unchanged, or at all. What better place, then, for a creature like the Hydra? When Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, was tasked with his second labour, it was not merely a matter of finding the Hydra and waving a sword. No, this was a test, not just of strength, but of ingenuity. He arrived with his nephew, Iolaus, who, depending on the version of the myth, was either his charioteer, his assistant, or just someone who'd made the mistake of tagging along on the wrong day. At first, Heracles did what Heracles does best. He swung his club. Heads flew, splendid cracks echoed through the marsh, but no sooner had one head fallen than 2 more pushed up from the bleeding stump, hissing with renewed fury. Imagine the frustration. One can almost hear Heracles sighing. It was going to be one of those days. The swamp around them boiled with Hydra fury. Heads darted, fangs flashed, and yet Heracles refused to retreat. Instead, he adapted. With Iolaus at his side, he developed a new strategy, cauterization. Each time Heracles lopped off a head, Iolaus would dash in with a burning torch and sear the wound closed, preventing regrowth. Teamwork, efficient, if a bit smoky. Eventually, only the central head remained, the immortal one, yes. As if regenerating heads weren't enough, the Hydra had a head that simply could not die. Heracles wrestled with it, finally severed it, and buried it beneath a massive boulder. Because if you can't destroy something, at least make it inconvenient to access. To finish the task, Heracles dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, infusing them with a poison so potent that it would later spell doom even for other heroes. Those arrows would go on to kill the centaur Nessus, which in turn would lead to Heracles' own death. But that's a story for another night. What matters now is that the Hydra had fallen. The swamp went quiet and the labour was complete. Well, mostly. In one version of the myth, Heracles was denied credit for the labour because he received assistance from Iolaus, which honestly seems a bit harsh. But the gods were nothing if not fond of fine print. Still, the tale endured. The Hydra became a symbol of impossible problems, ones that required not brute strength alone, but patience, precision, and a helping hand. a reminder that monsters often outnumber swords. But what did the Hydra mean, really? Why did the Greeks imagine such a creature? Part of it, of course, was the landscape. Swamps were feared in the ancient world. They were mysterious, disease-ridden, and impossible to navigate. They swallowed people without a sound. The Hydra was a personification of the danger lurking in these places, a visible form for an invisible threat. But there's also a philosophical dimension. The Hydra represents the nature of struggle. Not all problems die when struck. Some divide, multiply, return fiercer than before. The ancient Greeks knew that. Their world was full of uncertainty, plague, war, famine, betrayal. You could win a battle and lose a kingdom, solve one crisis and find two more waiting behind it. The Hydra coiled in her marsh was that truth made flesh. And yet, she was not unbeatable. It's tempting to think of Heracles as merely a brawler, but the Hydra reminds us that even he had to think, had to innovate, had to accept help. His greatest victories were never his alone. There's a lesson in that, gently tucked beneath the fangs and fire. The Hydra's legacy extends far beyond Greek myth. Her name has become a literary device, a political metaphor, a psychological symbol. In every era, people have faced Hydra-like problems, those complex recurring challenges that seem to multiply the more we engage them. And still we remember the torch, the cauterization, the cleverness. In ancient art, the Hydra was a favorite subject. On painted amphorae, she coils and strikes, heads twisting like braids in the wind. Sometimes she is dragon-like, sometimes more serpentine. Heracles is always there, grim and sweating, club in one hand, torch in the other. The scene is dynamic, chaotic, but always frozen just before resolution. We don't see the moment of victory, only the effort. Perhaps that's fitting. In Roman times, the Hydra was reshaped a bit, more monstrous, less symbolic, but she never lost her place in the pantheon of horrors. Later, in Christian allegory, she became a stand-in for sin, for heresy, for whatever needed smiting with dramatic flair. But the essence remained, a creature that could not be defeated by ordinary means. In some Renaissance retellings, the Hydra became almost seductive, a feminine monster, part woman, part serpent, echoing older fears of the wild and the unknown. The swamp became not just a place, but a metaphor for desire, temptation, and danger. But strip away the centuries, and we return to the still waters of Lerna, to the mist, to the hiss. Imagine it now, you're standing on the edge of the marsh, the reeds part with a rustle, a low ripple moves across the water, and then a head, long, narrow, fanged, rises into view. Another follows, then another, until the night blooms with serpents. 100 eyes blink, 100 tongues taste the air. You take a step back, not from fear, but from awe. Because this isn't evil, this is ancient power, chaos, wrapped in elegance. A puzzle, not a curse. And somewhere far off, a torch flares in the darkness. A hero steps forward, not to slay, but to understand. So rest now. The Hydra sleeps again in her swamp, coiled beneath lilies and mud. Her heads no longer hiss, her breath no longer poisons. She dreams of fire and rain, of battles lost and won. And you are far from Lerna now, safe beneath your blankets, where no heads multiply and no blades are needed. The marsh is still, the torch is out, and the monster, like you, is at peace. Sleep deeply and let the world remain quiet. Let the hush of the evening settle around you like soft wool. The air is still now, nothing stirs except memory and the faint echo of hooves on ancient stone. The stars above you are distant and patient, watching as they always have. But below, in the smouldering hills of a forgotten land, a creature once breathed fire into the wind. She was impossible, furious, and proud. Her name was Chimera. Tonight, we'll wander slowly through the scorched hills of Lycia in what is now southwestern Turkey. But once, long ago, this was a place of legend. And in the cracks between rocks, where sulfur steamed from the earth, the Chimera waited. The Chimera was a monster built by contradiction. She was part lion, part goat, part serpent, a fusion of things that had no business being in the same body. And yet there she stood, a lioness at the front, a goat rising awkwardly from her back, and a long, viperous snake forming the tail, coiled and hissing behind her. And if that weren't enough, she breathed fire. Of course she did. Greek poets described her with a mix of horror and admiration, a creature so unnatural she must have been divine. Or perhaps something the gods regretted and forgot to recall. She was, like many monsters of that ancient world, a child of Typhon and Echidna, which meant that chaos was not just her nature, it was her birthright. Her name Chimera literally means she-goat in Greek, which, considering she was also a lion and a snake, seems like an odd naming decision. But the Greeks often named things after their most confounding feature. And what could be more confounding than a goat erupting from the back of a lion? She roamed the burning hills and haunted the people of Lycia. They feared her as a wildfire, as a punishment from the gods, as something too powerful and strange to reason with. And truly, she didn't have an agenda. She didn't demand sacrifices or build empires or leave cryptic riddles. She just existed and scorched everything around her. Now, why would a monster like this take root in Lycia? It helps to know a bit about the land. Lycia was known in the ancient world for its strange, flaming hills, places where methane seeped up from the earth and ignited into ghostly blue flames. Even today at the site called Yanartash, Flaming Rock, fires still burn from the ground, flickering mysteriously. To the Greeks, such phenomena had to have a cause. Fire from nowhere? Clearly something monstrous was to blame. So they imagined a chimera, a creature who breathed these flames and lived beneath the rocks. Myth, after all, is how the Greeks explained the impossible. The most famous story involving the chimera comes from the saga of Bellerophon, a hero not as well known today as Heracles or Odysseus, but just as bold. Bellerophon was a prince or possibly a fugitive, depending on whom you ask. He ended up in Lycia under complicated circumstances and found himself sent on a mission that was frankly meant to kill him. The king of Lycia, hoping to rid himself of this inconvenient guest, ordered Bellerophon to slay the chimera, a clever way to dispose of someone without technically getting blood on your hands. Oh, you're still alive? Splendid. Do pop out and kill the unkillable monster next, would you? But Bellerophon, rather than succumbing to dread or excuses, went hunting. Now, it's important to note that Bellerophon had a secret weapon, or rather a winged one. He had managed through prayer, perseverance, and a golden bridle from the goddess Athena to tame Pegasus, the winged horse. With Pegasus beneath him, Bellerophon could fly, placing him out of reach of the chimera's claws, fangs, and crucially, her fire. Imagine that scene, the chimera stalking across the cracked earth, the goat bleating as flames pour from her jaws, the lion's roar echoing through the hills, and above her, wings beating like thunder, a man with a spear circling, watching. He couldn't get too close. One plume of fire and it would be over, but he couldn't stay above forever either, so he devised a trick. He fixed a block of lead to the tip of his spear. A strange choice unless one is thinking several moves ahead. Swooping down, dodging a blast of flame, he drove the spear into the creature's throat. The lead, heated by her breath, melted down into her windpipe, suffocating the fire, and with it the monster. It was not brute strength that won the day, but cleverness, heat and metal, a smith's trick, not a warrior's. The Greeks valued that, wit over muscle, strategy over sheer force. In their world, heroes often triumphed, not because they were the biggest, but because they were the smartest. And so the chimera fell, the fire quieted. The people of Lycia breathed easier. Bellerophon returned, not just as a survivor, but as a hero, though as with many Greek heroes, his story would not end so smoothly. He grew proud, too proud, tried to fly to Olympus itself, and Pegasus, wise beast that he was, threw him before reaching the heights. But that's another tale. The chimera, for her part, was buried in the hills. The flames, some said, were her breath still leaking through the cracks of the earth. Even today, the fires at Yanartash still burn. Some believe them to be eternal, others know they're just gas. But there's something undeniably haunting about flames that never die. In later traditions, the chimera evolved. She was no longer just a creature, she became an idea. Chimera came to mean anything impossible, any fusion of things that should not exist together. A dream too strange to be real. A metaphor for excess. In medieval bestiaries, she was drawn with new combinations: leopard spots, dragon wings, human faces, always changing, always shifting, and in that sense she became a reflection of our own imaginations. Chaotic, beautiful, terrifying. She also endured in art. On pottery and coinage she appears snarling, breathing fire, claws arched, usually with Bellerophon above fire, her spear-armed, the moment before victory or the moment before something goes terribly wrong. The Greeks loved that tension, that breath between triumph and tragedy. And what of her deeper meaning? To the Greeks, monsters were rarely just monsters. They were warnings, reminders, reflections. The chimera, with her 3 bodies and burning breath, might represent uncontrolled imagination, dreams without boundaries, or the dangers of hybrid things, neither one nor the other, but both. A symbol of the unknown, of the unnatural, or perhaps she was just a creature of fire, given form so that people might understand the earth they stood on. That, after all, is the quiet genius of mythology. It gives shape to confusion, a face to fear, a story to stand where silence once was. And so tonight, as you lie still beneath your own roof, centuries away from the hills of Lycia, you might picture her, the lioness pacing through blackened stone, the goat's head bleating and burning, the serpent tail twitching in anticipation. She is not coming for you. She never was. She was born. She raged. She was defeated and remembered. That's all any monster asks. Now the hills are quiet. The fires dim. Pegasus flies on, and Bellerophon, prideful and fallen, is long gone. But the chimera remains, not as threat, not as curse, but as story. Sleep now. The wings have passed overhead. The flame is just a flicker. The beast is at rest, and so are you. Close your eyes now. Let the soft tide of silence lap gently at the edges of your thoughts. There is no hurry, no weight of waking hours, just the breath in your chest and the drifting stories of the old world. Tonight we do not go underground or into the swamp. We do not follow lions or serpents or beasts with too many legs. No, tonight we gaze into eyes, not yours, not mine, but hers, and if we are not careful, we may never look away again. This is the story of the Gorgons, and of one in particular. You know her name, even if you don't remember. Where from? It lingers in the back of the mind, like a warning from a dream. Medusa. Say it slowly, softly. The name is already an incantation. Now the Gorgons were 3 sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. And depending on which version of the myth you prefer, they were either always monstrous or became monstrous later. That's the thing about Greek mythology. Nothing is ever simple. Everyone has a past, often a complicated one. Let us start with the old versions, the ones that came before sympathy was invented. In these, the Gorgons were born monstrous, children of the sea gods Phorcys and Ceto, creatures of dread from the moment they took their first breath. They lived far off in the west at the edges of the world, past the boundaries of maps and reason. They had wings of bronze, snakes for hair. Their skin was scaly, their teeth sharp, and their eyes could turn you to stone. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. One glance, and your body would freeze in place, your breath would stop, and your soul would drift from flesh, turn cold and grey. The Gorgons were not pursued. They did the pursuing, and no man returned from their lands intact. But then a different version arose, a softer one, one with tragedy. In this telling, Medusa was not born a monster. She was a maiden, perhaps a priestess of Athena, dedicated to the goddess of wisdom and war. She was beautiful, so beautiful in fact, that even the gods noticed, and one did more than notice. Poseidon, god of the sea, desired her. And according to the myth, he pursued her. In some tellings, he seduced her. In others, he assaulted her. And not in a quiet meadow, but in Athena's own temple. When the goddess returned and found her sanctuary defiled, she did not punish Poseidon. She punished Medusa. Because in mythology, justice is not always just. Gods, after all, behave like people, which is often the most dangerous thing about them. And so Medusa was cursed. Her hair became snakes. Her face, once lovely, became something unlookable, not because it was grotesque, but because it was too powerful. She was given the gift or curse of the petrifying gaze. No longer a priestess, no longer human, no longer desired, she fled west with her sisters. And, from that moment on, she was both feared and hunted. Now consider this, a woman punished for being beautiful, then hunted for being dangerous. There's something ancient in that rhythm, and sadly, something eternal. But back to the myth. You may remember the name Perseus, a hero with a magic bag and a knack for inconvenient quests, sent by a king who wanted him dead without saying so. "Bring me the head of Medusa," said the king, as if asking for a bouquet. And Perseus went, but not alone. He had help, divine help. The gods, for reasons of their own, gave him tools. Athena provided a polished shield, one that could be used as a mirror. Hermes gave him a curved blade. He also received a magical satchel to carry the head and the winged sandals of the nymphs with which he could fly. You may notice a pattern in Greek heroics. The monster is rarely defeated by brawn alone. There are tools, relics, rules. The Greeks understood that monsters were not simply strong. They were symbols. They had to be approached with reverence and cunning. Perseus flew to the edge of the world, to the land where the Gorgons slept. They slept during the day, you see. Their stone-turning eyes only worked when open. Even curses need rest, and as the Gorgons lay coiled among the rocks, Perseus crept forward, not looking directly but through the reflection in his shield. It's a clever image, isn't it? He cannot face her directly. He must look through an image, indirect, safe, distant. One wonders how many truths in life must be seen the same way. With the curved blade, he struck clean, fast. Medusa's head fell, eyes still open, still dangerous. And from her blood sprang two beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden sword. Life emerging from death, a symbol of beauty and violence fused. Perseus placed the head in his satchel. It would remain a weapon. Even severed, Medusa's gaze could petrify. He used it to defeat foes, turn kings to stone, and eventually returned it to Athena, who mounted it on her shield. Now, pause there. Athena, who cursed Medusa, who armed the man who killed her, who then placed her head on a shield and carried it into battle. Why? Why would a goddess wear the face of her victim? Some say it was guilt, a way to honor Medusa. Others claim it was pure practicality. The head was, after all, extremely effective. But maybe it's something else. Maybe Medusa had become more than a curse. She had become a symbol. In time, Medusa's image spread across the ancient world, not as a monster, but as a guardian. Her face, the Gorgonian, was painted on shields, carved into doorways, etched on coins and breastplates, not to frighten the innocent, but to ward off evil. Apotropaic, the scholars call it. A fancy word meaning something that turns danger away. A reversal, then, from hunted to protector, from cursed to divine. Her face twisted in rage, eyes wide, tongue protruding, became a kind of ancient alarm system. A declaration that the space behind the image was sacred, untouchable. How's that for poetic justice? And so across the centuries, Medusa was reclaimed. Artists painted her, not with scales and fangs, but with sorrow. Her hair was not snakes, but symbols. Her story was not one of terror, but of transformation. In the Renaissance, poets reimagined her, painters softened her features. In the modern world, she became a feminist icon, the woman punished for her beauty, transformed against her will, then demonized for surviving. Is she still terrifying? Yes, but perhaps not for the same reasons. And what of her sisters? Stheno and Euryale, the immortal Gorgons, often go unmentioned. They weren't slain, they weren't cursed anew, they remained wild, winged, grieving. Their names mean strong and far-roaming. They were perhaps even more terrifying than Medusa, yet less famous. That too is a kind of curse, to outlive your sister and be forgotten, but somewhere in the mythology between lines, they still fly. Not quite villains, not quite mourners, just shadows across the edge of the world. And here we arrive at the heart of it. The Gorgons, and Medusa in particular, are not monsters in the way we understand them. They are protectors, victims, warriors, goddesses. Their image born of fear becomes a kind of shield, not to harm but to defend. Think of it, a face so powerful it turns violence to stone. Not through fists, not through flame, but through the act of looking. What is more dangerous than a woman who cannot be looked upon, and who in turn sees everything? Tonight, let us not fear her. Let us imagine her not as a beast with snake hair and a bloodied stare, but as a figure walking the border of myth and memory, not chasing you, not hunting, simply watching, guarding. Perhaps she stands outside your window now, not to petrify, but to keep watch, to hold back whatever else the night might bring. Sleep beneath her gaze. You are safe. The monsters she once faced are long gone, and she, Medusa, has become something else. No longer victim, no longer villain, but a quiet goddess of the threshold. And you, dear listener, are on the peaceful side of that line. Sleep now. Let the stone turn back to flesh. Let the hair become wind. And let her eyes, gentle now, close at last. Take a breath, not too deep, just enough to feel your ribcage gently rise like the tide beneath a quiet moon. Let your limbs go still, your thoughts go soft. Tonight we set sail. Not toward peace, not yet. Tonight we pass between monsters. There is a place in the world where the sea narrows like a throat, and ships must slide carefully between high cliffs and deep waters. A place where every sailor knows that to steer clear of danger on one side, he must come perilously close to disaster on the other. This place, very real, very present, is the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily. The ancients knew it well, but they saw more than water, more than current. They saw jaws, they heard voices, they named the dangers that lurked there, gave them form and history and appetite. On one side stood Scylla, and on the other, Charybdis. If you were to ask an ancient Greek sailor which was worse, he might pause, shrug, and say, "Depends on how you'd like to go." Scylla lived in the cliffs. She didn't move much, just enough to ruin your day. She perched in her cave, high above the waves, and waited for ships to come close. And when they did, she reached down, fast, efficient, hungry. Homer tells us she had 12 legs, long and lean, stretching from her waist like some monstrous spider, and 6 long necks, each ending in a terrible head with 3 rows of sharp teeth. Her voice was like the yelp of puppies, pitiful and high, but her bite, oh, her bite was something else entirely. She didn't tear ships apart, she didn't breathe fire or crash waves. She was more precise. She plucked sailors from their decks like olives from a bowl, 1 for each head. 6 men gone before anyone could scream. Odysseus saw it happen. He'd been warned by Circe the sorceress. "Steer close to Scylla," she told him. "You'll lose a few men. It's horrible, yes, but better than Charybdis. Charybdis will take the whole ship." And so he did. He clutched the tiller, teeth tight, and watched as Scylla struck. 6 men lifted, flailing, screaming, then silence. It was not a battle, it was a toll, and she took it as she always did. But who was Scylla before this? There are stories, softer, sadder, that say she was once a girl. Not divine, not monstrous, just a girl who walked the shores and loved the sea. And one day she caught the eye of Glaucus, a sea god. He loved her. She did not love him back. He in desperation went to Circe, begged her to make him irresistible. But Circe, loved Glaucus, and Scylla, by simply existing, had ruined that love. So Circe did what goddesses so often do in myth. She punished the woman, she poisoned the spring where Scylla bathed, and the next time Scylla stepped into the water, she changed. Her body stretched, her legs twisted, dogs burst from her skin. She screamed and kept screaming until she found herself in the cliffs above the sea. No longer a girl, no longer human. She wasn't evil. She just became. And she stayed. On the other side of the strait, the water boils. That is where Charybdis waits. You don't see her until it's too late. She doesn't have arms or teeth or eyes you can look into. She's just a shape in the sea, a whirlpool that opens 3 times a day and drinks the ocean. And if you're in the way, down you go. She was once a daughter of Poseidon. The stories say loyal, proud. She helped her father drown coastlines and flood enemy lands. But Zeus, who had other ideas about balance and ownership, struck her with lightning. He chained her to the seafloor and cursed her with hunger. Now she swells and collapses, breathes in and spits out, never full, never still. She is absence made visible. The kind of danger you only understand once you've been pulled in. So there you are, a sailor, a captain, a hero passing through. To your left, a towering cliff, still as death with something sharp hidden in the shadows. To your right, water that pulls sideways, tugs at the keel, beckons with no promise of return. Pick one, you have to. Odysseus chose Scylla because losing 6 is better than losing everyone. That's what he told himself. What Circe told him, what the gods would have him believe. It's a cruel math, but Greek mythology is full of that kind of arithmetic, the kind where survival always costs something. You see, Scylla and Charybdis weren't just monsters, they were choices, bad ones. Scylla is the pain you expect. Swift, sharp, specific. You know it's coming. You brace for it. You live through it. Charybdis is the slow dread. The danger you try to avoid but feel pulling at your feet anyway. It comes quietly like regret, like gravity. Scylla kills a few. Charybdis devours all, and together they represent something very old and very familiar. The truth that some journeys offer no safe path, that sometimes to keep going something must be sacrificed. And yet Odysseus passed through, not untouched, not unscathed, but onward. That's the thing. Even in the face of ancient monsters, of losses and choices and waves that don't care, if you pray, the Greeks believed you could keep moving. Even if it hurt, even if the way was narrow, even if you cried, you could still steer the ship. Later, storytellers softened the edges. In some versions, Odysseus fights back, tries to stab Scylla as she grabs his men, but the gods laugh at that. You can't stab a choice, you can't strike a fate, you can only face it, sail through, and remember. In art, Scylla is often drawn as a woman above, beautiful, serene, and chaos below. Dogs and serpents and limbs, all braided into a single shape. A reflection of the sea itself, calm on the surface, madness underneath. Charybdis is harder to paint. She's not a creature so much as a phenomenon, a gaping mouth, maybe a swirling disk of foam, sometimes just a hole in the sea. But everyone understood her. The sailors did, the poets did, and so do we. We use them still. Between Scylla and Charybdis, the phrase survives, a way to say, I had no good options, a way to say, I chose what hurt less, a way to say, I'm still here. And that matters because sometimes the victory is not in slaying the monster, it's in knowing which one to face, in knowing when to hold the tiller and in not letting go. The ancient world was full of things the Greeks couldn't explain. Earthquakes, storms, currents, loss. But instead of surrendering to fear, they gave those things stories. Not to tame them, but to understand. They named their monsters, and in doing so, they named their fears and their courage too. So tonight as you lie in your bed, you are not at sea, you are not between rocks, there is no whirlpool at your feet, no jaws in the dark. You are safe. The strait is behind you. Scylla sleeps in her cave, curled around her sorrow. Charybdis turns slow and silent beneath a peaceful sea. And you are the sailor who passed through, not unchanged, but still sailing. Let the wind go quiet. Let the water calm. The monsters, just this once, are still. Sleep now and drift. You've already done the hardest part. It's quiet now. Let the hush of the evening wrap around you like a cool linen sheet, the kind worn by kings and commoners alike in the Mediterranean dusk. Imagine a torch flickering in some far-off corridor. Footsteps echo marble beneath your feet, a door opening and closing behind you. And now you are in the dark, in the labyrinth. It does not matter how you got here, only that you have. And somewhere at the center of this winding puzzle of stone and shadow waits the monster. Tonight we meet the Minotaur, not just a beast in a maze, though that's how he's often remembered, but something far older, stranger, sadder. Let us begin at the beginning, which, as with most Greek myths, is not simple, not clean, and certainly not family-friendly. It starts with a king, a Cretan king named Minos. Minos wanted to rule not just men, but the sea itself, so he prayed to Poseidon, god of the oceans, asking for a sign to prove he was chosen. Poseidon obliged, sending up from the surf a magnificent white bull, powerful, radiant, divine. Minos was to sacrifice it as a show of loyalty. But Minos, being human, made the usual mistake. He got attached. The bull was too perfect, too beautiful. Surely the gods wouldn't mind if he kept it and substituted a lesser one for the altar. They minded, in particular Poseidon minded, and as punishment the god cast a strange desire into the heart of Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae. She was struck with a longing not for a man, not even for a god, but for the very bull her husband had refused to sacrifice. What followed was, depending on your level of poetic tolerance, either grotesque or tragically divine. The queen sought help from Daedalus, the great inventor. And Daedalus, as artists often do, obeyed the brief without judgment. He built her a wooden cow, hollow and lifelike, in which she could climb and, well, deceive the bull. And from that strange union came a child with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The Minotaur. He was unnamed at birth. The name we use, Minotaur, simply means bull of Minos, as if he were a possession, a problem to be solved, and in many ways that's exactly what he became. The boy, if one can call him that, could not be raised among people. He grew quickly, grew strong, grew wild. Minos, horrified and shamed, again turned to Daedalus, and Daedalus built the labyrinth. A palace of corridors, a maze so complex that even the architect could barely escape it. A structure where left and right became meaningless, where forward became back, where one might walk forever and never see the same wall twice. In the center they placed the Minotaur to live, or at least to exist. He was fed. He was feared. He became legend. Now, here's where Athens comes into it. At the time, Crete was a naval superpower, and Athens, still young and growing, had once rebelled and lost. As part of the peace, Minos demanded tribute. Every 9 years, Athens would send 7 boys and 7 girls to Crete, and those youths would be placed in the labyrinth with the Minotaur. No weapons, no guide, no escape. It wasn't execution, not formally, just a disappearance, a slow forgetting. They entered. They never returned, and so the Minotaur became more than a monster. He became the engine of fear, a reminder of defeat, a story told in Athens to keep young people obedient, a sacrifice to power and to shame. But then, of course, came a prince, Theseus, son of the king of Athens, brash, clever, reckless, a walking definition of heroism, at least the Greek variety, which included equal parts nobility and ego. When the time came for the next tribute, Theseus volunteered to be among the youths, not to die, but to kill. He sailed to Crete. And as the stories go, he caught the eye of Princess Ariadne, daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, half-sister to the Minotaur if anyone was counting. Ariadne, moved by the handsome foreigner, or perhaps simply sick of the bloodshed, gave Theseus a tool. Not a sword, not a map, a thread, a spool of golden string to be tied at the entrance of the labyrinth, a guide back if he could survive. Theseus entered. He walked the winding paths, let the walls close in, let the silence deepen, and finally he found the creature. Imagine that moment. The hero, face to face with the beast, and the beast not roaring, not charging, just staring. Because here's the part the stories often skip over. The Minotaur didn't ask to be there, didn't ask to be born, didn't choose the labyrinth. He was made, then caged, then fed strangers in the dark. Was he savage? Yes. Was he a monster? Perhaps, but also perhaps not. Theseus fought him, killed him, left his body in the dark, and then, following the thread, escaped. Victory, the end. But as with all Greek myths, the ending leaves questions. Who was the Minotaur really? Some say he was simply a cautionary tale, a symbol of unnatural union, of pride punished by the gods. Others see him as something deeper, the unwanted child, the castaway, the embodiment of shame, buried at the heart of power. In historical terms, there may have been something more. Archaeologists studying the ruins of Knossos, the grand palace of ancient Crete, have found vast, complex layouts, rooms upon rooms, corridors with no straight line. Some believe this was the labyrinth, not a trap, but a court, not a prison, but a palace. So, complexes that visitors felt lost. The bull too mattered in Minoan culture. Bull leaping was a sacred sport. The animal was revered, not feared. Its horns appear in art, on altars, in frescoes. So perhaps the story of the Minotaur is a Greek reinterpretation or misinterpretation of a foreign custom. The Athenians, after all, loved a good narrative, especially one where they, the clever city of democracy and reason, triumphed over the strange islanders with their bulls and their rituals. It is history retold by victors dressed in myth. But whatever the truth, the story has endured. The image remains a beast in a maze. And the maze. Oh, the maze is the most important part because it's not just a building. It's a metaphor. The labyrinth is the mind, the past, the trap of guilt, the structure we build to contain what we don't want to face. And the Minotaur, he's what we've placed at the center. A fear, a memory, a mistake, something we would rather forget. And so we wall it in, but it never goes away. It waits. Walk far enough into yourself and you'll find it. And then if you're very lucky or very brave or very foolish, you'll find the thread and come out again. Theseus did. He left the labyrinth, but not without cost. He abandoned Ariadne on an island. Reasons vary. Some say he was ungrateful, others say Dionysus claimed her, but the result was the same: betrayal. He returned home, forgot to change the sails from black to white as he'd promised. His father, watching the ship from the cliffs of Athens, saw the dark sails and believed his son dead. In grief, he threw himself into the sea. And so the Aegean was named. Even victory in Greek myth comes with mourning. The Minotaur is dead, the labyrinth is empty, but somehow the story still echoes. We still build mazes, we still lock things away. And deep inside, the part of us that once heard the story as a child, that part still walks the halls, wondering what waits around the corner. So, let's leave the torchlight behind. Let the corridors fall silent. The thread has been followed. The monster has been faced. You're no longer in the dark. You're no longer in the maze. You are back here where it is warm and still, where the Minotaur cannot find you, where the walls are no longer closing in, where sleep is waiting, gentle and slow. And whatever monster you face, it is not tonight. Let the labyrinth vanish. Let the hooves fall silent and rest. You've already walked far enough. It is night again. The kind of night where the wind hushes the trees into stillness, and the moon casts pale silver through the window like a watchful eye. You are still, and all is quiet. But long ago in the world of myth, the wind was not always so gentle. There were times when it came shrieking across the sea, tearing sails from masts, snatching food from tables, stealing men from the decks of ships, and sometimes from the very skies. And if you were an ancient Greek and you heard that wind howling through the cliffs, you didn't just call it a storm. You might have whispered, harpies. Or if your conscience was not clean, if you'd wronged the gods or shed innocent blood, you might fear something worse. The Furies. Tonight we drift into their stories, into winged warnings and shrieking skies, into judgment that flies and punishment that never sleeps. We begin with the Harpies. Their name comes from the Greek harpazo, meaning to snatch, which is exactly what they do. Snatch, take, steal. They were not always evil, not precisely. In the earliest myths, they were storm spirits, daughters of the sea god, Thaumas, and the oceanid Electra. Their names were Aiello, Ocypete, and sometimes Selaieno, lovely names really, Storm, Swift Flyer, and the Dark One. At first, they were merely elemental, fierce winds given form. They raced through the air, screeching across the sea like a bad omen. Sometimes they helped carry souls. Sometimes they stole objects from the hands of mortals. They were fast, unpredictable, and always hungry. But over time, as stories grew darker, the Harpies became less abstract and more terrifying, less weather and more wrath. They were imagined as women with the bodies of great birds, vast wingspans, talons sharper than knives, and faces that once might have been beautiful, but had long since been twisted by rage and divine duty. Their scent was said to be foul, rot, and smoke and salt. Their voices screeched like rusted hinges. Their feathers were streaked with filth, tangled with the remnants of whatever they had taken last. The Harpies didn't hunt because they needed to eat. They hunted because someone had to, because the gods, in their infinite wisdom, sometimes needed messengers who could make mortals miserable and fast. One of the most well-known tales involving them is the tragedy of King Phineus of Thrace. Phineus had a gift, the power of prophecy, but he made the mistake of revealing too much truth. He spoke freely of the gods' secrets, lifting the veil between divine will and human consequence. And for this he was punished not with blindness, not with death, but with hunger. Each day a feast would be laid before him, meat roasted to perfection, fruits ripe and bursting, bread still warm. But as soon as he reached for a morsel, they came, the Harpies. They descended in a fury of wings and claws, screaming and cackling. They would snatch the food away or foul it with filth so vile that even touching it was impossible. Phineus starved day after day, surrounded by an abundance he could not touch. He aged, grew gaunt, and wept, not from hunger alone, but from the cruelty of being so near to relief and yet forever denied. Eventually, help arrived in the form of the Argonauts, those bold sailors on their quest for the Golden Fleece. Among them were Zetes and Calais, the Boreads, sons of the North Wind. They had wings of their own, feathered limbs that shimmered with speed. When the Harpies next came for Phineus's feast, Zetes and Calais gave chase. Later, sky filled with feathers, steel, and shrieks. The Harpies fled westward, beaten and breathless, until the goddess Iris, messenger of the gods, appeared. She struck a bargain. The Harpies would leave Phineus in peace, and in return, their lives would be spared. They vanished into the farthest reaches of the world. Some said they made their home near the Elysian wind, far from man but never truly gone. They lingered in myth, always hungry, always watching. Some said they stole children, others believed they carried away the souls of the guilty. Others still believed that they were divine instruments of pestilence, bringers of plague. And perhaps they were all these things in one form or another. Because the harpies don't just represent theft, they represent torment. Unrelenting, unjust torment. That shadow of cruelty that sometimes hangs over those who are already suffering. They take what cannot be taken again. But the Furies are not thieves. They are not mischief makers or shrieking winds. They are judges. They are punishment given wings, older than gods, born of blood. Their origin is a tale soaked in myth and myth alone. When Uranus, the sky god, was overthrown by his son Kronos, his blood fell to the earth, and from that earth, Gaia, mother of all, rose the Erinyes, the Furies, Alecto, Megaera, Tisiphone. They were not created, they emerged. Primeval forces, not evil, not good, but necessary. Alecto punished moral crimes. Megaera, jealousy and vengeance. Tisiphone, murder, especially within families. They did not come uninvited, but once summoned, they never stopped. The Furies are always female, but not in the gentle way mortals often imagined femininity. They are motherhood without mercy, memory without forgiveness. The part of justice that does not weep but endures. Their hair was coiled with serpents, their breath burned. They carried torches, scourges, and poisonous snakes. Sometimes their robes bled, sometimes their very footsteps caused madness. Their presence brought guilt alive. Their pursuit made the mind their hunting ground. They didn't just punish you, they made you punish yourself. No crime summoned them faster than kinslaying, particularly the murder of a parent by a child. And so we return to Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Agamemnon, who sailed to Troy, who sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to win the winds, who returned years later only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover, and Orestes. He was told that justice demanded he avenge his father, and he did. He killed his mother. And the moment her blood hit the floor, the Furies rose. They came screaming from the cracks in the earth, not with swords, but with questions. They asked not whether Orestes was brave, but whether he was right. He fled to Delphi, to Apollo, to Athens, but they followed into temples, into dreams, into madness. The first trial in history was held to decide his fate, not by mortals, but by gods. Athena herself cast the deciding vote, choosing mercy. Orestes was freed, but the Furies were not banished. Athena offered them a new role, not as tormentors, but as guardians of justice. She gave them a home beneath Athens in the sacred grove of the Areopagus. There they would reside, watching over oaths, hearing the cries of the wronged, and they accepted. They became the Eumenides, the kindly ones. It was not a euphemism, it was transformation, because even vengeance can grow tired of blood. Even fury can find peace. They still appeared, of course, in stories, in dreams, in guilt that wouldn't fade, but they had become part of justice, not its enemy. In this, the Greeks showed a profound truth, that justice is not only about punishment, it is about memory. The Furies remember. They remember what the world tries to forget. The girl silenced, the child abandoned, the murder unpunished, the lie that became law. And they wait because time for them does not move as it does for mortals. They do not age, they do not sleep, they watch. And when the world turns too far from balance, they rise. In art they are sometimes softened, made into older women, stern but wise. But in the oldest depictions they are fire in the shape of women. They are nightmares made noble, and they never blink. Harpies are hunger, Furies are conscience. Harpies are storm, Furies are structure. Both fly, both frighten, but the Harpies take what is yours. The Furies make you face what you've done. And that is perhaps more terrifying, because monsters, as we often say, are not always outside the house. Sometimes they are inside, sometimes they wear your name, sometimes they sound like your own thoughts. But the Furies don't arrive to harm. They arrive to remind, to weigh, to make sure you know deep down, quietly just before sleep, that justice is not blind, it only waits. But tonight there is no cause for fear. The Harpies have flown far from your windows. The Furies are not coming unless you've summoned them. And you haven't. You are still. You are safe. You are drifting, And they are only stories, old and winged and watching, but not for you, not tonight. Let the feathers settle, let the torches dim, let sleep take you softly. The kindly ones are at rest, and so are you. The night is quiet now, the kind of quiet that lives in the space between thoughts, the kind that feels like a question waiting to be asked. And that's fitting, because tonight we meet the monster who waits with questions. Not with claws, not with fire, but with a riddle and a smile, a stillness, a choice. This is the story of the Sphinx, not the Egyptian one, that grand, silent guardian of sand and sun. No, the Greek Sphinx is something else entirely, not a monument, but a challenge. Part lion, part woman, part bird, and all mystery. She sits outside the city of Thebes on a rock just high enough to see the road, just low enough to be seen. Her wings are tucked in, her gaze unblinking. She does not chase. She does not move. She waits. And when someone passes, she speaks one question. Answer correctly, and she lets you go. Answer wrong, she devours you. But let's begin, not with her end, but her origin, which, like many things in Greek mythology, is half divine, half uncertain. The Sphinx was said to be the daughter of two monstrous parents, Orthrus, the two-headed hound, and the Chimera, herself a creature stitched from lion, goat, and serpent. Others say she was born of Echidna and Typhon, the same pair who spawned so many of the terrors we've met on this journey. But while her siblings raged and clawed and burned, the Sphinx was given a quieter weapon: intellect. She was sent, some say by the gods, others say by fate, to punish the city of Thebes. Hera may have sent her angry over an old insult, or Hades in need of balance, or perhaps it was simply the gods being gods, petty, patient, and fond of difficult lessons. Either way, the Sphinx appeared. She took her place outside the gates of Thebes, and there she stayed. She didn't destroy the city. She didn't demand a tribute. She didn't scream or threaten. She asked a riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? No hints, no elaboration. Those who tried to pass her without answering, or who answered poorly, were caught in her claws and torn apart, not out of malice, simply because that was the price of failure. Thebes was paralyzed, trade slowed, travelers vanished, the fields went untilled, the people cowered behind their walls, their future held hostage by a single sentence. Not a dragon, not a war, a question, and that's what made the Sphinx terrifying. She didn't punish through brute force. She punished through uncertainty. Her victims were not the weak, they were the unprepared. To face her was to gamble with your understanding of the world, to risk not just your life, but your certainty. And so the question remained, waiting until one day a man arrived, Oedipus. His name echoes through time, known now for the strange tragedy of his fate. But on this day, he was still only a traveller, weary, clever, and already marked by prophecy. He had left his home in Corinth behind, believing he could outrun a curse that he would kill his father and marry his mother. And, in trying to escape that fate, he walked straight into it. But not yet, for now he was just a man on the road to Thebes. And on that road he met her, the Sphinx, her eyes fixed on him. He did not flinch. She asked her riddle, and he answered, "Man." In childhood he crawls on 4 legs, in adulthood he walks upright on 2, and in old age he walks with a cane as with 3. The answer was simple, obvious perhaps once you heard it, but no one else had. No one else had looked at the riddle and seen not a trick but a truth, that life itself is a riddle. That time shapes us, that we change not just in form but in need. Oedipus understood the riddle not as a puzzle, but as a pattern. And with that answer the Sphinx was undone. She didn't curse, she didn't cry, she simply leapt from her rock and fell. Her body dashed against the cliffs, her wings snapping, her secret sealed. Why? Some say she was bound by magic. that once her riddle was answered, her purpose was spent. Others say she died of shame, unable to bear defeat. But perhaps she chose to go, because a riddle once solved is no longer sacred. A mystery once unraveled cannot remain a monster. And she was never really a beast. She was a question. And now she was done. Thebes rejoiced. Oedipus was hailed as a hero, married the queen, and became king. But you know, or perhaps remember, that this was not a happy ending, because the man he killed at the crossroads was his father, and the queen he married, his mother. The riddle he solved was only the first. The harder one, the one about who he truly was, would take much longer to answer and cost him everything. But that is another story. Let's linger here just for now with the Sphinx, because she's more than a monster. She is the moment before understanding. She is the stillness before speech. She is the test that cannot be passed by strength, only by reflection. The Sphinx is what waits when you stop running. When you're alone, when a question rises inside you that no one else can answer, she is not an enemy. She is a gate, and every one of us must pass her. Sometimes once, sometimes again and again. In art she appears regal and restrained. Lioness body curved in repose, wings arched as if on the verge of flight. Her eyes distant, not cruel, not even curious, just waiting. In the most famous depiction, a vase from the 5th century BCE, she sits on a pillar. Oedipus stands below, thinking. That's all. No drama, no violence, just a question, and a man trying to find the shape of its answer. The Greeks didn't draw her with fire or gore. They didn't need to, because the Sphinx is terrifying, not for what she does, but for what she requires. She requires you to know yourself. And there's no weapon for that, only thought. Even now she waits in our stories, in classrooms, in crossroads, in quiet moments before dawn. She lives wherever a question is asked that might change you. And she doesn't threaten, she challenges. There is something oddly comforting in that. All the monsters we've met so far, they lash, they howl, they hunger. The Sphinx? She only asks. And sometimes what she offers, that moment of understanding, is worth the risk. Because knowledge, like all sacred things, must be earned. And what we learn in silence often stays with us longer than what we learn in fire. So if you ever find yourself standing before her, not in a myth, but in a moment, don't panic, breathe, think. The answer may not come right away. It may feel impossible, but it is there, and she will wait, not kindly perhaps, but patiently, because that is what the Sphinx does. She waits for us to grow into our answers. And now she is gone. Her cliff is empty, her wings folded for good. And you, dear listener, have passed. You have walked the road, faced the riddle, spoken the words, and now you may rest. Close your eyes. The question has been asked, the answer given. The monster has stepped aside, and the gates have opened. Let us begin not with thunder or prophecy, but with a girl and her loom. She was called Arachne, a mortal with hands so deft they moved like wind through wool. Her tapestries shimmered with colour and precision. Scenes so finely woven they seemed to breathe. People said she must have learned from Athena herself, which was the sort of praise one should never utter too loudly in ancient Greece. Arachne didn't deny it. In fact, she laughed. She said she was better, and that, you see, was a mistake. For the gods of Olympus were not distant, noble deities. They were near, always near, and they didn't particularly like being compared to mortals, let alone outdone by them. So Athena came down from the heavens, her pride pricked like a burr under the skin, and challenged the girl to a contest. 2 looms, 2 minds, one divine, one human. And Arachne's tapestry, it was exquisite, a panorama of the gods' misdeeds. Zeus seducing women in a dozen disguises, Poseidon ravishing Medusa in Athena's temple, Apollo chasing nymphs who wanted nothing to do with him. The thread glittered with uncomfortable truth. Athena's work, by contrast, was flawless and stern, a depiction of piety and punishment. But when she saw Arachne's piece, she flew into a rage, not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't. She tore it apart and struck the girl down. Then, in that strangely poetic cruelty the gods so loved, transformed her into a spider. And so Arachne still weaves, but without fingers, without pride, without a voice, a cautionary tale, and one that sets the tone. Because in Greek mythology, if a god notices you, it rarely ends well. The Olympians, you see, were not above meddling. They did not dwell on high with benevolent detachment. No, they leaned down, eyes sharp as hawks, looking for beauty, arrogance, wit or defiance, anything that might amuse or annoy them. Humans were their toys, their distractions, their cautionary examples. Take Semele, a mortal woman beloved of Zeus. He whispered sweet nothings into her ear and promised her anything she wished, and in a moment of fatal honesty, she asked to see him as he truly was, in all his divine radiance. Zeus warned her. He begged her to reconsider, but an oath was an oath, and when he revealed his true form, the brightness alone consumed her, burned to ash. Their unborn child, Dionysus, was saved only because Zeus sewed him into his own thigh like a strange botanical graft. He was born later with a head full of vines and madness. Another mortal, Io, suffered a different fate. She caught Zeus's eye, an unfortunate habit of many young women in mythology. To conceal her from Hera, Zeus turned her into a cow. A lovely cow, to be fair, but still. Hera, never one to be fooled for long, demanded the cow as a gift and assigned Argus, a giant with 100 eyes, to guard her. And so Io wandered, watched always, pursued by a gadfly Hera sent to torment her. She crossed continents, became a legend. Eventually she was restored to human form, but not before learning that divine attention was a form of punishment in itself. Even mortals who never sought glory often found themselves dragged into the gods' schemes. Cassandra was one such soul. She was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo in exchange for her love. But when she changed her mind, as people do, Apollo did not take rejection well. He cursed her. She would still speak true prophecies, but no one would ever believe her. She saw the fall of Troy. She saw her own death. She saw fire and ruin. And no one listened, not once. The Greeks had a word for this kind of tragic arrogance: hubris. It wasn't just pride, it was overstepping. Crossing invisible lines drawn by gods who did not like their creations to become too clever, too bold, or too beautiful. Mortals who rose too high were always brought low, not always with death, but sometimes with something worse. Take Niobe, Queen of Thebes. She had many children, 12 in some stories, 14 in others, and she made the mistake of bragging that she was more deserving of worship than Leto, who had only 2. Unfortunately for Niobe, Leto's 2 children were Artemis and Apollo. They descended like arrows from the sky. One by one, Niobe's children fell. She wept and screamed and begged. In the end, the gods turned her to stone, a weeping rock carved by grief. And somewhere in Anatolia, the stone still stands. Mortals could rarely win. And when they did, it often came with strings attached, like poor Phaethon, who demanded proof that the sun god Helios was his father. Helios, bound by paternal pride and perhaps a touch of guilt, allowed him to drive the chariot of the sun for a day. A teenage boy at the reins of a flaming, sky-draggering chariot. It did not go well. He lost control. The sun veered too close to the earth. Fields scorched. Rivers boiled. The world began to unravel. Zeus, ever the cosmic janitor, hurled a lightning bolt and ended it. Phaethon fell like a star and crashed into the river Eridanus. Mortals grieved, the gods moved on. Even the great wars of mortals were often started by divine pettiness. The Trojan War, for instance, did not begin with ships or sieges. It began with a golden apple. Eris, goddess of discord, wasn't invited to a divine wedding, so she did what any resentful guest might. She tossed a golden apple into the feast, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all reached for it. They demanded a judge, and they found one in Paris, a Trojan prince tending sheep far from the noise of court. Each goddess offered him a gift. Hera offered power. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. He chose beauty. He chose Aphrodite. And that woman, Helen, was already married to a Spartan king. When Paris took her to Troy, the world ignited. 1,000 ships launched. Heroes died. Cities burned. All because of one mortal asked to judge a divine beauty pageant. It should be said no good ever came of mortals trying to decide which god was better. The gods didn't want truth. They wanted flattery. But mortals could not avoid them, not really. They prayed, they sacrificed, they lit fires and poured wine and whispered names before sleep. The temples were many, and the gods were everywhere, not always listening, but always present. And the relationship was not about love, it was about survival. To be a mortal was to walk carefully, to give thanks quickly, to take no credit even for your own genius, to hope above all to be overlooked. Because to be noticed by the gods was to become a story. And in Greek mythology, stories rarely ended well. The gods did not weep for mortals, they used them. Sometimes they gave gifts, yes, a golden touch here, a prophecy there. But the gifts often turned sour. Midas wished for everything he touched to turn to gold, and soon he could touch nothing. Not bread, not water, not his daughter. He begged for the gift to be taken back. It was, but not before he learned that divine generosity always has a price. Some mortals tried to outwit fate, but fate was older than the gods. The Moirai, the fates, spun, measured, and cut the threads of life. Even Zeus could not undo what they wove. Oedipus tried. Told he would kill his father and marry his mother, he fled the home he knew, and in doing so he fulfilled the prophecy. The very effort to escape his doom brought it into being. That was the cruel beauty of Greek myth. No one was above fate, not kings, not queens, not heroes, and certainly not mortals. So why, one might wonder, did people keep believing in these gods? Why pray to deities who punished more than protected? Because the gods explained the world. The storms, the floods, the sudden illnesses, the way fortunes rose and fell, all of it could be seen in the stories. The gods gave shape to chaos. They made meaning from suffering. They were not just punishers, they were metaphors, archetypes, warnings in flesh. And for all their flaws, they were unforgettable. To be immortal in Greek mythology was to be temporary, a momentary flash of joy or error, a name in a line of verse, a thread in the great tapestry of fate, sometimes brilliant, often blood-stained, always fragile, and somewhere above or beyond the gods watched, amused, displeased, or merely curious. And you, little mortal, you simply did your best to survive the story. It's one thing to make a mistake and suffer for it. But imagine being doomed not because of what you did, but because of what your great-great-grandfather once said to a god, possibly while drunk and possibly while losing at dice. In the world of Greek mythology, curses were not simply misfortunes, they were legacy items, heirlooms passed down with the family name. You could inherit your father's nose, your mother's eyes, and a divine malediction that would ruin your entire bloodline for generations. It made for a dramatic family tree, heavy on nobility, light on happy endings. Consider, for example, the House of Atreus, a dynasty so steeped in doom that it makes the average soap opera look like a church picnic. The trouble began, as it so often does, with a quarrel between brothers. Atreus and Thyestes, sons of Pelops, squabbled over the Mycenaean throne. There was betrayal, adultery, and then, inevitably, cannibalism. Atreus, having discovered that his brother had an affair with his wife, decided the appropriate response was to serve him a feast of his own children, artfully roasted. Now, you might assume the gods would intervene here, smite someone, send a memo, but no. The gods simply nodded grimly and let the curse settle in like a stain. From that moment on, the family was doomed. Atreus's Son Agamemnon went on to become the commander of the Greek forces in the Trojan War, a great honor. He also sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to get a favorable wind, spent 10 years at war, and was murdered in his bath upon returning home by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover. His surviving children then had to decide whether avenging their father was more important than not murdering their mother. A difficult position even by mythological standards. Orestes, the son, chose vengeance. He killed Clytemnestra and was promptly hounded across the land by the Furies, ancient goddesses of vengeance with snakes for hair and a passion for justice that did not forgive matricide. Only with divine intervention and a trial at the Areopagus in Athens was Orestes finally acquitted. But even then the stain lingered. The house of Atreus was the cautionary tale of cautionary tales. A bloodline cursed with betrayal, madness, and murder. Not because each generation was evil, but because the weight of divine wrath could not be shaken off like old dust. And it wasn't just royal families who suffered this fate. Take Oedipus, poor unfortunate Oedipus, born to Laius and Jocasta, king and queen of Thebes. Laius, like many mythical men, made a mistake. He abducted a young man, violating hospitality and sacred law. The gods frowned upon this, and a curse was laid. The prophecy came: their child would kill his father and marry his mother. Naturally, they did what any responsible parents might do. They tried to have the baby killed, but the servant they tasked with the job couldn't quite bring himself to do it. He left the child to die on a hillside instead. A shepherd found him. The boy was raised in Corinth, unaware of his origins. Years later, Oedipus, now a young man, heard a whisper of prophecy himself that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, he fled Corinth, trying to outrun destiny. But you can't outpace the fates. He met Laius on the road. There was an argument, as ancient fathers and sons are wont to have. A fight broke out. One man died. Later, Oedipus married Jocasta, queen of Thebes, and had children. The truth came slowly, horribly. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus blinded himself, and their children, Antigone and her siblings, would inherit not just a ruined throne, but a family history thick with sorrow. Greek tragedy, you see, doesn't bother with happy endings. It begins with the seed of ruin and watches it grow. This idea that a family line could be cursed wasn't just poetic fiction. The Greeks believed in something called miasma, a kind of spiritual pollution. It could be inherited. You could be born unclean because of the sins of your ancestors. Blood cries out for more blood. And until the cycle is broken through sacrifice, exile, or divine mercy, it continues. We might see it as metaphor today, generational trauma, the sins of the father. But for the Greeks it was very literal, a spiritual rot that clung to a name, not unlike mildew on stone. You could change your clothes, your city, even your gods, but the curse remained. And so we find mortals who live in fear, not of what they might do, but what they are. Who they are. Perseus, hero and slayer of Medusa, was himself born of questionable circumstance. His mother, Danae, was locked in a bronze chamber by her father, who had heard a prophecy that her child would kill him. Zeus, never one to let bronze get in the way of romance, visited her in the form of golden rain, one of the stranger seduction tactics in myth. Danae conceived, Perseus was born. The king, Acrisius, did not kill the child, but set mother and son adrift at sea. They survived. Perseus thrived. Years later he returned and entirely by accident struck his grandfather dead with a discus at some friendly games. Fate fulfilled. Even when no one meant any harm, prophecy finds its loopholes. These stories reflect something deep in the Greek psyche. The idea that fate is not something you can bargain with. It is a web already woven, and every step you take simply tangles you further. Mortals tried to be clever. They tried to outthink destiny. But the gods always smiled quietly and let them try. Sometimes the curse was physical. The line of Cadmus, founder of Thebes, was riddled with misfortune. His descendants included Pentheus, torn apart by his own mother in a frenzy of Dionysian madness, and Actaeon, who accidentally saw Artemis bathing and was transformed into a stag, then hunted and killed by his own hounds. Cadmus himself, after a life of toil and tragedy, was turned into a serpent. His wife, too. They slithered off into obscurity, perhaps the kindest ending in that entire family history. But not all cursed families were royal. Some were simply too beautiful for their own good. Take the tale of Phaedra, wife of Theseus. Her stepson, Hippolytus, was a devout follower of Artemis. So devout, in fact, that he shunned all love and scorned Aphrodite. And you can imagine how well that went. Aphrodite, goddess of love and vengeance, arranged for Phaedra to fall in love with him. It was unnatural, tragic. When he rejected her, she took her own life and left a note claiming he had attacked her. Theseus cursed his son and Poseidon, never one to pass up a smiting, obliged. Hippolytus died, dashed against the rocks by his own chariot horses. You could die because your family was cursed, or because a god wanted revenge on someone you reminded them of, or simply because you existed in the orbit of doomed people. Misery was contagious. The Greeks didn't believe in fairness, not in the modern sense. They believed in moira, one's share, one's portion of fate. Some were given great glory, others were given ruin, sometimes both. But what about redemption, you might ask? What about mortals who escaped the curse? They're rare but not impossible. Orestes, hounded by the Furies, eventually received a trial in Athens. The jury was split, half for acquittal, half for condemnation. Athena herself cast the deciding vote, not in the name of justice, but mercy. And in that moment, a new idea emerged, that law might one day replace vengeance, that perhaps a man need not be defined solely by his ancestors' crimes. It was a glimmer of hope, a small one, but there it was. In the meantime, the average mortal lived quietly, married carefully, prayed constantly, one eye on the gods, one foot in the dirt, hoping the sins of the father had not already taken root in the son. To be immortal in Greek mythology was to live in a story that began long before you were born and might not end until long after you were gone. Your life was a single verse in a tragic poem shaped by bloodlines, curses, and the unpredictable whims of fate. You might rise, you might fall, but you would not escape the weight of your name. And if the gods whispered your family's name in Olympus, whether in praise or in jest, that was rarely a good sign. There are many lessons to learn from Greek mythology, but one stands above the rest, carved like a warning into the very foundations of Mount Olympus. Do not talk back to the gods. Don't question them. Don't correct them. Don't get clever, sarcastic, or poetic. Don't mutter under your breath. Don't sigh too loudly. And above all, do not under any circumstances try to win an argument, because they will hear you. They always do. And while gods may be immortal, their egos are surprisingly brittle. Take the case of Pentheus, king of Thebes. Young, proud, fond of order, he ruled with a sharp eye and a firm hand. And then Dionysus arrived. Now Dionysus was not your typical Olympian. Born of a mortal mother, Semele, and carried in Zeus's thigh, he straddled the line between divine and human, wild and civilized, wine and wrath. His worship was strange, ecstatic, dancing in the woods, drinking, shouting, shedding inhibition like a snakeskin. Pentheus, unimpressed, declared it nonsense. He banned Dionysian rites, arrested the god in Pausanias disguise, mocked his long hair, and in the sort of fatal decision only a tragic character could make, decided to spy on the Bacchant women in their revels, dressed as one of them. He crept into the forest in a flowing gown, perched in a tree for a better view. And there, in the moonlight, the women saw him. But they did not see a man. Dionysus clouded their minds. They saw a lion. They attacked. His own mother, Agave, was first to reach him. She tore him down. He died in pieces, smiling up at the stars. The gods are nothing if not theatrical. Pentheus's crime? He laughed. He doubted. He told the gods they were nonsense. And the gods, it turns out, have a very clear opinion on nonsense. Another fellow who learned this the hard way was Capaneus, a warrior in the myth of the 7 against Thebes. He scaled the city walls bold as brass and declared aloud in the middle of battle that not even Zeus could stop him. Zeus did stop him with a lightning bolt. Instant death. Crisped mid-sentence, there's a curious silence that follows stories like these, a kind of collective holding of breath because the moral is never subtle. Speak out of turn and you will be turned to ash or stone or mist or a cautionary statue in some temple courtyard. Even those who told the truth, not lies but inconvenient truths, were punished. Cassandra, princess of Troy, was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo. But when she rejected his advances, or rather accepted the gift and then rejected him, he cursed her. She would still see the future. Yes, she would see it clearly, brilliantly, unbearably, but no one would ever believe her. She warned of the Trojan horse, of the sack of the city, of her own death. And every word fell like dust. Disbelieved, ignored, dismissed. The gods, you see, don't mind if you're right as long as it's flattering. If it's not, well, you'll find yourself yelling into the void. And sometimes the punishment came not from the god directly, but through the very forces of fate itself. Take Arachne, you'll remember her from earlier, the weaver who dared claim she was better than Athena. The detail often overlooked in her story is this. She was right. Her tapestry was beautiful. It told the truth. It depicted the gods' crimes, their disguises, their seductions, and Athena, though furious, could not deny the skill. So she destroyed the work and the girl. Because it is not enough to be right. You must also be reverent. And in ancient Greece, reverence did not mean quiet belief. It meant submission. It's easy to judge the gods as petty, and to be fair, they often were, but their responses reflect something deeper about the way the Greeks saw the world. The gods were not moral exemplars. They were not just or fair in the way we use those terms now. They were powerful, and that in the ancient world was the only justice that mattered. Power could not be questioned without consequence. The gods represented not ideals but forces. The sea was Poseidon, stormy, unpredictable, capable of bounty or destruction. Wisdom was Athena, cold, strategic, sometimes cruel. Love was Aphrodite, capricious, overwhelming, delightfully irrational. To insult a god was to insult the very fabric of the world. To question Artemis was to court death in childbirth. To laugh at Demeter was to risk famine, and the gods did not need to punish you personally. Sometimes they let your own words do the damage. Consider Niobe again, the queen who bragged about her many children, mocking Leto for having only 2. It was not just pride, it was speech. She voiced disrespect. She put it into the world, and so Leto's children, Apollo and Artemis, struck her family down one by one. When the last child died, Niobe fled to a mountaintop and begged the gods to end her suffering. They granted her request, turned her to stone. Even her tears, they say, became part of the mountain, always weeping, never changing. It's tempting to imagine these stories as metaphors, cautionary tales for courtly behavior. But in ancient Greece they were lived truths, not literal perhaps, but deeply embedded in ritual and thought. People didn't just fear the gods, they feared saying the wrong thing near a shrine, making a joke during a sacrifice, yawning too loudly during a festival. Speech was power, and power could summon attention, and attention, divine attention, was rarely a blessing. The Greek term for this was asebeia, impiety. It didn't mean heresy in the modern sense, it meant acting improperly toward the divine, speaking out of turn, behaving without the right reverence. Socrates, the philosopher, was executed not for atheism but for asebeia, corrupting the youth, introducing new gods, and failing to honor the old ones. The gods did not require you to love them, but they demanded respect. The curious thing is the gods themselves rarely held to the same standard. Zeus was a serial adulterer. Hera was vengeful beyond reason. Poseidon flooded cities in fits of pique. Apollo flayed a man alive for losing a music contest, and yet to question their actions was to invite ruin. It was a divine paradox. You were expected to worship beings whose flaws were legendary, and you had to do it with sincerity. And so the average mortal developed a very pragmatic relationship with religion. You honored the gods because it was safer that way. You made offerings, you said your prayers, you did not boast, you did not challenge. And if the gods smiled on you, wonderful. And if they didn't, you assumed you'd offended them somehow and tried harder. There's a quiet desperation in that, a sort of cosmic appeasement, a reminder that in a world ruled by immortals with bad tempers, the only real power mortals had was silence. Which brings us to another kind of punishment. Not dramatic, not fiery, not sudden, but slow oblivion. The Greeks believed in kleos koi, glory, the kind that lives on in stories. But if you defied the gods in some quiet, unseen way, you might not be struck down. You might simply be forgotten. No songs, no statues, no name carved into stone. To be remembered was its own kind of immortality. To be erased was the cruelest fate of all. That perhaps is why so many Greek mortals died dramatically. They weren't just unlucky, they were memorable. To live quietly was safe, but it meant no glory, no legacy. And so mortals danced along a razor's edge, seeking renown but fearing offense, wanting to be known but not cursed, wanting most of all to speak their truth without being struck by lightning. But the gods were always listening, even when they pretended not to be, especially then. And so, dear listener, if you ever find yourself wandering the paths of ancient Greece, under a fig tree, or beside a bubbling spring, and you feel tempted to complain aloud about your lot in life, perhaps wait until you're well out of earshot, because one of them might be listening and one of them might be bored. And mortals who talk back tend not to talk long. You're walking along a dusty road. There's a cool breeze, the scent of thyme and olive in the air, and the sound of distant goats. All is calm, all is ordinary. And then suddenly, a creature the size of a house steps out from behind a rock and decides, you look like lunch. Welcome to a fairly typical Tuesday in ancient Greek mythology. For mortals, the world was never just fields and sky. It was also lairs, caves, cliffs, forests thick with teeth and scales. You never quite knew what might be lurking behind the next olive tree, a shepherd, a satyr, or a three-headed dog. The Greeks were particularly fond of monsters, not in the way modern stories might treat them. Misunderstood, sympathetic, tragic. No, their monsters were generally speaking quite content being horrible. They didn't need complex motivations, they just needed appetites. And unfortunately, mortals were often the preferred dish. Let us begin with one of the greats, the Chimera, not just one beast, but three. A lion in the front, a goat sprouting from its back, and a snake for a tail. It breathed fire, of course, because why not? Its purpose in life appeared to be to roam the countryside, burning livestock, and incinerating anyone with a torch and a sword who thought they might make a name for themselves. Heroic, yes, but also flammable. Then there's Scylla. Poor sailors. They thought the worst part of their journey was the open sea, the storms, the pirates, the hunger. But then they reached the straits, narrow and perilous. On one side, a whirlpool named Charybdis, which could suck down entire ships like a drunkard draining a wineskin. And on the other Scylla, a rock-dwelling horror with 12 legs, 6 heads, and a fondness for plucking sailors off decks like hors d'oeuvres. There was no safe route. If you steered away from one, you veered too close to the other. And in life, as in myth, some choices are not about winning, they're about minimizing how much of your crew you lose. Or take the Minotaur, half man, half bull, raised in a labyrinth so complex that even its builder barely escaped. This monster was the result of a long and unfortunate chain of divine meddling and royal bad judgment. A queen enchanted to fall in love with a bull. an architect with too much imagination and a child born of that union imprisoned forever in darkness. The Athenians, having displeased King Minos of Crete, were forced to send 7 young men and 7 maidens every 9 years as tribute to be released into the labyrinth. None returned, until of course Theseus came along with his ball of string and healthy levels of self-confidence. But for decades before that, the Minotaur simply ate. That was the thing about monsters in Greek mythology. They weren't just dangers, they were reminders, symbols, warnings perhaps, that the world wasn't made for human comfort, that out there in the deep places the gods had let chaos roam free, and mortals were often the price paid for order. The Sphinx perched outside. Thebes was another such price. She asked riddles. If you answered incorrectly, she killed you. For weeks, months, perhaps even years, travelers passed, tried, failed, died. Until Oedipus, clever, doomed Oedipus, came along and answered her question correctly. The Sphinx leapt from her perch and perished. Which sounds like a victory until you remember that this was only the beginning of Oedipus's troubles. Solving one monster's riddle only led him deeper into the riddle of his own blood. These creatures weren't all created equal either. Some were born of primordial forces like Typhon, a storm demon so massive and terrible that the gods themselves fled Olympus when he rose. Others were spawned by Echidna, the mother of all monsters, who seemed to have a very productive relationship with Typhon, birthing Hydra, Cerberus, and a host of other delightful creatures best admired from a distance. Hydra, for instance, was a serpent with multiple heads. When you cut one off, 2 more grew in its place, a handy metaphor really for problems that get worse the more you meddle. Or, in the case of Heracles, just another day's work. Heracles, the closest thing Greek mythology has to a full-time monster exterminator, spent his life dealing with the gods' unfinished business. Giant boars, man-eating birds, hellhounds, all sent his way, usually as part of a labor assigned by a cowardly king or an angry god. One gets the sense that the Olympians didn't like clearing up their messes. They just created monsters, then waited for some sweaty mortal with a club to solve the problem, and when he did, they might grant him a wreath, or more likely, send him another one. Even beautiful creatures could be deadly. The sirens, for instance, sat on craggy rocks by the sea, singing songs so sweet that sailors forgot themselves, forgot food, sleep, wives, children, everything. They steered toward the sound, dashed their ships on the rocks, and died smiling. Odysseus, clever man that he was, stuffed his crew's ears with wax and tied himself to the mast just to hear their song without being lured. A rare case of a man encountering a monster and surviving with his life and ego intact. More often, mortals stumbled upon danger with no warning, a flash of feathers, a shadow in the sky, a hiss from a cave. The ancient Greek countryside in myth was riddled with hazards. Not just beasts, but divine punishments given form. And yet, despite all this, monsters were necessary. They gave heroes something to fight. They shaped stories into arcs, from fear to confrontation to sometimes triumph. But for the ordinary mortal, the non-hero, the farmer or fisher or child caught in the crossfire, they were simply a reminder that the world was not safe. Imagine living in a time where no explanation existed for earthquakes or droughts, where disease had no clear cause, where lightning struck without warning. The world must have seemed full of unseen forces, and so the Greeks filled that uncertainty with teeth and wings and claws. But monsters were not just symbols of nature, they were also warnings about behavior. Take Medusa. She began in some versions as a beautiful maiden. But after Poseidon assaulted her in Athena's temple, the goddess punished her, not Poseidon, by turning her into a Gorgon, snake hair, petrifying gaze, solitude eternal. What was she really? A monster or a woman, transformed by divine wrath into something others should fear? Perhaps both. The Greeks understood that monsters were not just born, they were made. Often they were mortals first, changed by curses, by jealousy, by vengeance. The line between human and beast was always thin. Lycaon, for example, was a king who served Zeus human flesh disguised as hospitality. In return, he was turned into a wolf, An early werewolf tale, if you like, but also a message. Offend the gods and you might lose more than your manners. Even lovers of gods could become monsters. Take Lamia, once a queen of Libya, beloved by Zeus. Hera naturally took offense. As punishment, Lamia's children were slain. Grief drove her mad. Hera then added a cruel twist. Lamia was cursed never to sleep and to devour the children of others. She became a night-stalking demon, feared in lullabies, but beneath the horror was sorrow. Her monstrousness was not her fault. It was her sentence. In this way, monsters in Greek myth were often tragic, not in a soft modern sense, but in the hard, classical sense of the word. They suffered, they frightened, they died, but they were never senseless. They meant something. Even Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, had his purpose. He stood at the gates of the underworld, let souls in, did not let them out. A monster, yes, but also a guardian, a cosmic border collie of sorts, and so mortals lived with monsters, not just in story, but in worldview. They were the teeth in the darkness, the consequences of divine will or human folly, or simply the old world not yet tamed. No mortal could kill them all. No city could be safe forever. But they endured. They built temples to gods who might keep monsters away. They passed down tales. How to defeat them, how to avoid them, how to live with the knowledge that they might always be nearby. For some, monsters were an invitation, a chance to rise, to become a hero, to carve their name in the annals of myth. For others, they were just bad luck, a wrong turn, a scream in the night. And for most, they were simply a reminder that the world was not made for their comfort. It was a place of beauty, yes, but also of wings in the sky, scales beneath the waves, eyes in the dark. And when the gods were bored or careless or cruel, they let the monsters roam free. There's a strange thing about Greek heroes. They shine like stars in poetry, cast in bronze, immortalized in epic. Their names echo through the centuries: Achilles, Heracles, Jason, Odysseus. But if you pause a moment and really look at their stories, not the glory but the lives themselves, you might begin to wonder, was it worth it? Because to be a hero in Greek mythology was to be famous, yes, but also to be hunted, cursed, betrayed, punished, exiled, tormented by the gods, and without fail to die tragically. You were heroic, but you were disposable. Let's begin with the most obvious case. Achilles, the poster boy of Greek heroism. Stronger than all, faster than most, and blessed or cursed with a choice. Live a long, quiet life in obscurity, or die young and gain eternal glory. Naturally, he chose the latter. This is Greek myth, after all. Longevity was never fashionable. So he sailed for Troy, fought for 10 long years, killed Hector, dragged his body around the city walls, and then one morning was struck down by a single arrow, guided by Apollo, fired by Paris, and aimed at the one soft place on his body, the heel. It's poetic, of course, but also rather deflating. All that strength, all that wrath. And in the end, one tiny vulnerability was enough, because heroes were never allowed to simply age. They didn't retire, they didn't settle down and write memoirs. They didn't even get to enjoy their triumphs. They existed to die at the right moment in the right way, for the right song to be sung, and the gods made sure of it. Heracles, or Hercules if you prefer the Latin form, is another fine example. A man so strong he held up the sky, cleaned the stables of Augeas in a single afternoon, and strangled snakes in his cradle. But for all his power, he was never free. The 12 labors, those famous feats, were not optional. They were penance. You see, in a fit of madness sent by Hera, Heracles killed his wife and children. The punishment, service, labor, tasks so monstrous, they might as well have been death sentences. And even after completing them, he didn't get peace. His life ended in agony, poisoned by a tunic soaked in centaur blood. A gift from his second wife, who had been tricked into thinking it would ensure his fidelity. He died on a pyre, flames consuming the mortal half of him. the divine half ascending to Olympus. Yes, the gods welcomed him in the end, but only after they had burned him down to his bones. Then there's Jason, handsome, charming, ambitious Jason. He assembled the finest team in mythology, the Argonauts, and sailed off to win the Golden Fleece. It was a dazzling journey. Monsters, clashing rocks, enchanted lands, and of course, Medea, the brilliant, terrifying sorceress who helped him succeed, killed for him, betrayed her family for him. And what did he do when they returned? He married another woman. Medea responded, as Medea does, by murdering their children and leaving him broken and alone. Jason, once so glorious, died years later when a beam from his rotting ship fell and crushed him. A hero forgotten, killed not by war or wrath, but by neglect and gravity. These men, lion-hearted, battle-scarred, were never truly safe, not from monsters, nor from their friends, nor even from their own choices. Their greatness didn't protect them. In fact, it often attracted the worst. The gods were quick to take offense at mortals who gained too much glory. After all, divine attention was rarely a compliment. Ask Bellerophon. He was a proper hero, tamer of Pegasus, slayer of the Chimera, a man favored by the gods. And then one day he decided to fly Pegasus up to Olympus, not to conquer, just to visit. It did not go well. Zeus sent a gadfly to sting the horse. Bellerophon fell, survived technically, but was crippled, blind, and lived out his days wandering alone, hated by gods and men alike. Because the one thing that a mortal must never do is try to sit at the table of the divine, and that's not to say heroism wasn't admired. The Greeks celebrated it in song and sculpture, but there was always a sense of danger about it, a sense that to rise too high was to invite the fall. And nowhere is that clearer than in the story of Ajax, a giant among men, a warrior of unmatched strength and courage. After Achilles' death, his armor was to be awarded to the next greatest Greek. Ajax expected it, Odysseus received it. Humiliated, maddened, Ajax plotted revenge. But Athena clouded his mind. He slaughtered livestock, thinking they were his comrades. When he came to his senses, grief-stricken and dishonored, he fell on his own sword. No enemy defeated him, only shame. It's important to understand how the Greeks viewed glory, kleos, as they called it. It was not just fame, it was the legacy of your deeds. What would be remembered after you were gone? What poets would sing? What statues would show? And because the afterlife was frankly rather dismal, grey fields, wandering shades, no wine to speak of, kleos was the only immortality that mattered. To be forgotten was worse than death, and so heroes chased danger, risked everything. They weren't reckless because they were foolish. They were desperate for meaning, for memory, for a life that would echo. And yet there's a quiet sadness to it all. Odysseus, for instance, won the war at Troy through cunning. The Trojan horse was his idea, and after the war he spent 10 years trying to get home, battling storms, monsters, temptations, all because he had once boasted that his triumphs were his own. And Poseidon took that very personally. Even when he reached Ithaca at last, his troubles weren't over. He had to slaughter a house full of suitors, rebuild trust with his wife, reassert his kingship. It was never over. Not really, because in Greek myth, the hero never gets to rest, and when they do, it often means they're dead. Even the great Perseus, who slew Medusa and rescued Andromeda, ends not in triumph, but in obscurity. His victories made him famous, yes, but he fades from the story, settles down, vanishes from the epic stage. Glory, it seems, has an expiration date. The women of mythology, too, had their share of heroic suffering. Though less often sung by bards, their stories are no less seared by pain. Atalanta, for example, swiftest of runners, deadliest of hunters, she swore never to marry unless beaten in a foot race. Many tried, all failed, until one man, Hippomenes, used golden apples from Aphrodite to distract her. He won. They married. And then, caught in a moment of passion, they made love in a sacred temple. The gods, of course, were not amused. They were turned into lions, forever circling, never resting. So many Greek heroes ended up transformed, not exalted, but altered, humbled, made into animals or stars or flowers. Their stories twisted by divine hands into reminders for the rest of us. Be brave, yes, but not too brave. Be famous, yes, but not too proud. Live brightly, but do not outshine the gods. Even those who served the gods directly could not count on safety. Asclepius, son of Apollo, became so skilled in healing that he learned to raise the dead. A noble calling, perhaps, but one that annoyed Hades. Death was, after all, part of the cosmic order, so Zeus killed him with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes who made the bolt. In turn, Zeus banished Apollo to serve as a mortal shepherd, a cascade of punishment. Even the divine could be demoted, the heroic undone. And yet, despite all this, the danger, the madness, the inevitable fall, mortals still aspired to be heroes. They volunteered for quests, they prayed for signs, they followed omens into forests full of fangs and fire. Because obscurity was worse, cowardice, unthinkable, a quiet life almost shameful. The Greeks didn't want safe stories, they wanted ones worth telling. And so over and over, mortals gave themselves to the gods and the monsters and the wars and the wounds, not for peace, but for song. The bards remembered them. We remember them. They were chewed up by myth, yes, but they were not forgotten. They were heroic and they were disposable. But perhaps, just perhaps, they knew that going in, love, they say, makes the world go round. But in Greek mythology, it more often sends it spinning wildly off course than straight into a ditch. Because in the world of gods and mortals, love wasn't the soft rose-petalled notion we like to imagine today. It was far more treacherous, a force of nature, or worse, a divine weapon. It could bless, yes, but more often it ruined. And for mortals, falling in love, or worse, being loved by a god, was one of the most dangerous things that could possibly happen.